The 1950s, when muscle cars were still figuring things out and failing spectacularly. The 1950s were like the awkward teenage years of muscle cars, full of big dreams, questionable fashion choices, and designs that make us cringe today. Picture this. America was obsessed with jet planes and space rockets, and car designers got a little too excited. The result? Cars that looked like they belonged in a cheesy sci-fi movie rather than on the streets. Take the 1958 Plymouth Fury. Sure, it had a 318 cubic inch V8 that could roar, but its styling was a hot mess. That excessive chrome grille looked like a robot's buck teeth, and the tail fins? So big they could have doubled as airplane wings. Then there was the 1957 Studebaker Golden Hawk, a car that tried way too hard to be futuristic. Its bullet-nose front end and awkward rear deck made it look like two different cars welded together by someone who'd had one too many martinis at lunch. And let's not forget the early Chevy Corvette. Bless its heart, it had the performance potential, but looked like a melted candy bar with those saga headlights and weird proportions. These cars were fast, no doubt, but their looks? Let's just say they're perfect examples of why we shouldn't let engineers play with styling pencils after 3 cups of coffee. What's truly fascinating is how these designs reflected America's post-war optimism. Everyone was so excited about the future that they forgot to ask whether giant chrome teeth on a car were actually a good idea. The 1950s proved that when it comes to muscle cars, power doesn't always equal beauty. And sometimes, the uglier they were, the more memorable they became. The 1960s, when muscle cars got serious, and some got seriously ugly. The 1960s were the golden age of muscle cars, but buried beneath all that horsepower and tire smoke were some truly unfortunate-looking machines that proved even America's greatest era of automotive performance couldn't escape a few styling disasters. Let's start with the 1963 Dodge Dart, a car that packed a punch with its 413 cubic inch V8, but looked like it had just been told some devastating news. Those droopy, down-slanted headlights and the scowling grille gave it permanent sad face syndrome, while its boxy, upright body made it resemble a refrigerator on wheels. Then there was the 1967 AMC Marlin, AMC's attempt to create a sleek fastback that went horribly wrong. Its roofline looked like someone had sat on the rear windshield, creating an awkward humpback profile that made parking lot attendants wince, and that bizarre rear window treatment was like looking through a mail slot. Not to be outdone in the ugly stakes was the Ford Falcon Sprint, which took Ford's sensible compact and tried to turn it into a muscle car with about as much success as putting racing stripes on a toaster. Its bland, upright greenhouse and frumpy proportions made it the automotive equivalent of dad jeans, despite the beefed-up engine under the hood. Even the vaunted Plymouth Barracuda of 1964 to 66 wasn't immune. That enormous flat rear window, the largest in production car history at the time, made the car look like it was wearing giant, awkward glasses, while the stubby rear deck gave it an unfinished appearance. What's fascinating about these ugly ducklings is how they reveal the growing pains of the muscle car era. Manufacturers were so focused on stuffing bigger engines into smaller cars that sometimes the styling departments got left behind, resulting in machines that could tear up the quarter-mile, but made spectators cover their eyes in the pits. The 1960s proved that while horsepower was easy to come by, good looks weren't guaranteed, and some of these automotive misfits have become more memorable for their awkward styling than their performance credentials. After all, anyone can build a fast car, but it takes real creativity to build one this homely. The 1970s, when muscle cars lost their muscle and their looks. The 1970s were like watching your favorite athlete get old, slow, and start dressing badly. Muscle cars didn't just lose their power thanks to emissions regulations. They also lost their damn minds when it came to styling. Take the 1975 Chevrolet Laguna S3, a car that looked like it had been in a front-end collision even when it was brand new. That ridiculous aerodynamic nose cone looked less like a speed machine and more like a vacuum cleaner attachment, while the rest of the car slumped like a depressed walrus. Then there was the Plymouth Superbird, which took NASCAR's rulebook way too literally. That comically tall rear wing looked like a park bench glued to the trunk, and the pointy nose cone made it seem like the car was constantly sniffing something suspicious, all while the body lines fought with each other in a visual screaming match. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare the world for the AMC Pacer. the fishbowl on wheels that made every parking lot 10% uglier. Its bubble-like greenhouse made passengers feel like they were riding in a terrarium, while the stubby nose and fat hips gave it the proportions of a toad that had eaten too many flies. Even the mighty Pontiac Trans Am wasn't safe. Those screaming chicken decals on the hood looked like a bad tattoo your uncle regrets, and the shag carpet interior made it feel less like a muscle car and more like a mobile bachelor pad from a porno that time forgot. What's truly wild about these 1970s disasters is how they reflect America's automotive identity crisis. Oil crises, safety regulations, and corporate bean counters had turned the muscle car into a shadow of its former self, and the styling departments seemed to be coping by huffing paint fumes. These weren't just bad-looking cars. They were tragic comedies of errors, rolling reminders that sometimes, when you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one while looking ridiculous doing it. The 1980s, when muscle cars became boxes with identity crises. The 1980s should have been a wake-up call for Detroit, but instead, it became a decade where muscle cars forgot how to be muscular. And worse, forgot how to look good doing it. This was the era of angular sheet metal, plastic-clad disappointments, and performance numbers, so weak they'd make a 1970s land yacht feel fast by comparison. Let's start with the Chevrolet Citation X11, GM's attempt to make their mediocre front-wheel drive Econobox sporty. The result? A car that looked like a folded pizza box with delusions of grandeur. Its blocky silhouette and awkward proportions made it seem like designers gave up halfway through the sketch, while the performance version's decals just highlighted how sad the whole endeavor really was. Then there was the Dodge Omni GLH, which stood for Goes Like Hell, but should have stood for Go Dofful Looking Heap. This was Carroll Shelby's most embarrassing project. A boxy hatchback with all the visual excitement of a dishwasher, sporting a turbocharger that couldn't compensate for its tragic lack of charisma. The Pontiac Fiero deserves special mention. What started as an exciting mid-engine experiment quickly became a cautionary tale about plastic body panels warping in sunlight, giving these cars the distinct appearance of a melted action figure within just a few summers. Even the Buick Regal Grand National, while powerful, looked like a rental car that had been dipped in black paint and forgotten in a corner. Its conservative, squared-off styling completely failed to communicate the monster lurking under the hood. The real tragedy of 1980s muscle cars wasn't just their anemic power outputs. It was how they abandoned the aggressive stances and flowing lines that made their predecessors iconic, replacing them with the automotive equivalent of gray flannel suits. These were cars designed by committees more concerned with fuel economy than passion, built by corporations that had lost their way, and sold to a public that was just happy the disco era was over. The 1980s proved that when you take the muscle out of muscle cars, all you're left with is a sad, boxy reminder of what might have been a decade where performance vehicles looked about as exciting as the desktop computers that were replacing them in American garages. The 1990s, when muscle cars tried to be everything and failed at all of it. The 1990s were a confused decade for muscle cars, an awkward transition period where manufacturers threw every half-baked idea at the wall to see what would stick. The result? A gallery of automotive misfires that couldn't decide if they wanted to be sports cars, family sedans, or spaceships, and ended up failing spectacularly at all three. Let's begin with the Ford Probe GT, the car that nearly replaced the Mustang and might have killed Ford's performance legacy forever. This front-wheel drive disappointment looked like a sneaker designed by someone who'd only heard about cars secondhand. Its bubbly, aerodynamic shape aged worse than milk in the sun, and the fake rear brake vents were the automotive equivalent of drawing muscles on a t-shirt. Then there was the Dodge Avenger, a car whose name promised excitement, but delivered all the thrill of watching paint dry. Its melted bar of soap styling and cheap interior plastics made it feel like a rental car even when it was brand new, while the performance version's wing was so oversized it looked like the car was trying to compensate for something. The Chevy Lumina Z34 took Chevy's boring family sedan and tried to make it cool with a body kit that appeared to be designed by a teenager with his first can of spray paint. The result was a car that looked like it was wearing a fake mustache and sunglasses to sneak into an R-rated movie. Even the Pontiac Firebird fell victim to 90s excess. That ridiculous catfish grille and overwrought body lines made it look like it was trying too hard to be futuristic, like a bad sci-fi prop that accidentally got mass-produced. What makes these 90s failures so fascinating is how clearly they reveal an industry lost in the wilderness. Muscle cars were no longer raw power machines, but they hadn't yet figured out how to be modern performance vehicles either. The styling department seemed to be working with two contradictory directives: make the cars look of the future while also appealing to traditional buyers, resulting in designs that pleased nobody except maybe the people making aftermarket body kits. These weren't just ugly cars. They were identity crises on wheels, perfect symbols of a decade that gave us both grunge music and frosted tips, where nothing quite knew what it wanted to be. The 1990s proved that when you try to make a muscle car that's everything to everyone, you usually end up with a car that's nothing special to anyone, a lesson automakers would fortunately learn just in time for the muscle car renaissance of the 2000s. The 2000s, when retro designs went horribly wrong and gave us some of the ugliest muscle cars ever made. The 2000s were supposed to be the triumphant return of American muscle cars, but somewhere between the nostalgic sketches and the production lines, things went spectacularly off the rails. This was the decade where retro-futuristic styling became an excuse for some of the most baffling automotive designs ever to disgrace American highways. Let's start with the automotive equivalent of a midlife crisis, the Chevy SSR. This unholy union of a pickup truck and a roadster looked like it had been designed by a committee that couldn't decide between building a sports car or a Tonka toy, resulting in a vehicle that managed to be both useless as a truck and embarrassing as a sports car. Its cartoonishly rounded fenders and awkward convertible top mechanism gave it the proportions of a sneaker designed by Dr. Seuss, while the clamshell hood opened like a giant metal mouth ready to swallow small children whole. Then there was the Chrysler Crossfire, a car that proved German-American collaborations could go terribly wrong. Its pinched rear end and bizarre side scallops made it look perpetually like it was wearing pants 2 sizes too small, while the comically oversized trunk lid appeared ready to launch into orbit at any moment. The Pontiac Aztek deserves its own special category of awful. This SUV wannabe muscle car hybrid looked like it had been designed by someone who'd only seen cars through a funhouse mirror, with its mismatched body cladding and awkward window lines creating a visual cacophony that made pedestrians instinctively cross the street to avoid it. Even the mighty Ford Mustang wasn't immune. The 2002 New Edge design's exaggerated body creases and overwrought details made it look like it was trying way too hard to be futuristic, like a high schooler's notebook doodle come to life. What makes these 2000s failures particularly tragic is that they came at a time when American automakers were finally getting serious about performance again. The engineering was there, but the styling departments seemed to be working on some alternate reality where good taste didn't exist. These weren't just ugly cars, they were missed opportunities, cases of manufacturers finally having the technology to build great performance cars, but somehow forgetting how to make them look good. The 2000s proved that nostalgia is a dangerous drug. Taken in small doses, it can be wonderful, but when you overdose on it, you end up with automotive abominations that make us wonder what exactly the designers were smoking in their focus groups. These cars weren't just ugly. They were cautionary tales about what happens when you let marketing departments run wild with PowerPoint presentations full of youthful energy and bold statements without anyone around to say, maybe we should tone it down a notch. The 2010s, when overdesign created monster muscle cars that only a mother could love. The 2010s brought us muscle cars with more angles than a geometry textbook and more aggression than a caffeine-fueled MMA fighter. But somewhere in this era of extreme styling, automakers forgot that sometimes less is more. This was the decade where bold became synonymous with bizarre, where every surface needed a crease, every grille needed to be massive, and every rear end needed a wing that could double as a picnic table. Take the Dodge Dart reboot. What should have been a triumphant return became a masterclass in how to ruin a legendary nameplate. Its face looked like it was permanently squinting in confusion, with a grille so busy it appeared to be suffering from automotive acne, while the awkwardly placed character lines made the side profile look like it had been in a minor fender bender at the factory. Then there was the Nissan Juke Nismo, Nissan's attempt to make their weird crossover sporty, that resulted in something resembling a frog that had been stung by bees. Those bulging headlights and awkwardly tall stance made it look perpetually surprised by its own existence, while the fake vents and aggressive body cladding screamed "try hard," louder than a teenager's first muscle car. The Chevy SS sedan proved that even tried-and-true formulas could go wrong. This Australian import wore its bland, anonymous styling like an off-the-rack suit 2 sizes too big, completely failing to communicate the fire-breathing V8 lurking under its snooze-inducing sheet metal. Even the Ford Mustang stumbled with its 2015 redesign's droopy headlights and awkward rear haunches that made it look like it was slouching. A far cry from the poised predator Ford intended. What makes these 2010s misfires particularly painful is that they came at a time when automotive design technology allowed for more precision and creativity than ever before. These weren't limitations of manufacturing, but conscious choices that somehow made it past countless focus groups and executive approvals. The decade's worst offenders suffered from what we might call Angry Bird syndrome, an arms race of aggression where designers kept trying to outdo each other with scowling front ends and razor-sharp creases until the cars looked less like vehicles and more like cartoon characters having a bad day. These weren't just ugly cars, they were case studies in how good intentions, make it sporty, make it stand out, can go horribly wrong when taken to extremes. The 2010s proved that when every car is shouting, none of them get heard, and left us with some of the most overwrought, overstyled muscle cars in history, vehicles that future generations will look back on and say, what were they thinking? With equal parts amusement and horror. The 2020s, when electric muscle cars redefined ugly and broke purists' hearts. The 2020s are proving to be the decade where muscle car design took a hard left into the uncanny valley, as electric powertrains and SUV mania collided with classic American performance in ways that can only be described as controversial. Let's start with the Ford Mustang Mach-E, the car that angered every pony car enthusiast by proving Ford would slap a Mustang badge on anything. This bloated, high-riding crossover looked about as much like a Mustang as a toaster oven resembles a barbecue grill, with its awkwardly stretched proportions and sad attempt at a muscular rear end that just made it look like it skipped leg day. Then there's the Tesla Cybertruck, Elon Musk's dystopian fever dream that drove through a 1980s video game and emerged looking like a polygon glitch. Its jagged, unfinished metal exterior made it seem like the designers gave up halfway through and just went with the first draft, while the armored glass that famously shattered during its unveiling was the perfect metaphor for its fragile attempt at being tough. Even Dodge, the last bastion of old-school muscle, fell victim to the era's questionable styling with the Charger Daytona SRT concept, a car that tried so hard to be futuristic it ended up looking like a Hot Wheels toy rejected for being too unrealistic. That gaping R-wing front grille, which isn't even a grille because electric cars don't need them, looked like the car was perpetually screaming in existential horror at its own existence. And let's not forget the GMC Hummer EV, a 9,000-pound behemoth that tried to justify its existence with extreme styling that mostly just made it look like a Tonka truck left in the microwave too long. Those awkwardly squared-off wheel arches and comically oversized Hummer lettering across the front were less tough and more overcompensating. What makes these 2020s abominations especially painful is that they represent a fundamental identity crisis. Are they muscle cars? SUVs? Electric appliances? The designers clearly didn't know either, resulting in vehicles that can't decide if they want to honor heritage or completely ignore it, and end up doing neither convincingly. These aren't just ugly cars, they're cultural flashpoints, symbols of an industry in transition, where the rules of design are being rewritten in real time, often badly. The 2020s may eventually be remembered as the decade muscle cars lost their souls, not just because they went electric, but because in their desperate attempt to be futuristic, they forgot what made them desirable in the first place, looking like they wanted to eat the road, not apologize to it. Why do ugly muscle cars exist? The shocking truth behind automotive design disasters. Let's address the elephant in the room. Why do automakers keep churning out hideous muscle cars when they clearly know how to design beautiful ones? The answer is a cocktail of corporate hubris, bizarre marketing decisions, and design trends that seemed like a good idea at the time, but clearly weren't. Take the Pontiac Aztec, often voted one of the ugliest cars ever made. It wasn't born ugly. It was focus grouped into oblivion. GM's designers originally envisioned a rugged, aggressive SUV, But by the time the bean counters and marketing teams finished improving it, they'd axed the flared wheel arches, chopped the budget for quality materials, and slapped on cheap plastic cladding to hide cost-cutting measures. The result? A car that looked like it was assembled from spare parts found in a junkyard. Then there's the phenomenon of design by committee, where too many executives get a say in styling. The 2010s Dodge Dart's messy face and awkward proportions were the direct result of conflicting visions between American and Italian designers. Fiat owned Dodge at the time, creating a car that couldn't decide if it wanted to be European sleek or American muscular, and failed at both. Sometimes engineers ruin everything. The Plymouth Superbird's ridiculous wing and nose cone weren't styling choices, but NASCAR-mandated additions that made it competitive on the track, where looks don't matter, and laughable on the street, where they absolutely do. Even safety regulations play a role. The 2000s Mustang's awkwardly high hood and bulky proportions were partly due to new pedestrian impact standards, forcing designers to raise front ends and soften edges, sapping the sleek aggression from classic muscle car silhouettes. And let's not forget plain old bad timing. The AMC Pacer's fishbowl windows were intended for an era when gas would cost $5 a gallon. It didn't. And its rounded shape was meant to evoke futuristic optimism. It instead evoked jokes about rolling bubbles. The truth is, ugly muscle cars are rarely accidents. They're cautionary tales about corporate mismanagement, misguided trends, and the eternal struggle between designers who want beauty and executives who want profit. For every stunning Shelby Mustang or sleek Corvette, there's a Chevy SSR or Dodge Caliber SRT. For reminding us that when artistry takes a back seat to spreadsheets, the results are often unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. The future of ugly. Will muscle cars keep getting worse? A terrifying preview of coming disasters. As we peer into the automotive crystal ball, one horrifying question lingers. Are we destined for even uglier muscle cars in the future? If current trends are any indication, the answer is a resounding yes, and the evidence is already on the drawing boards. Imagine a near future where performance SUVs continue their reign of terror, with electric muscle cars trying so hard to be futuristic they circle back to being laughable. The 2025 Ford Mustang Mach-E GT already gives us a preview. Its fake grille, useless on an EV, looks like a sad mustache drawn on a Tesla, while its bloated proportions scream, "I used to be athletic, but discover carbs." Then there's the coming wave of autonomous muscle cars. Picture a Dodge Charger that drives itself, but has the face of a Roomba vacuum, complete with glowing LED eyes to make it friendly instead of intimidating. Even worse, the rise of 3D printed car bodies could lead to Frankenstein designs where manufacturers experiment with outrageously impractical shapes just because they can think a Camaro with hexagonal wheel arches or a Corvette with a transparent hood showing off its battery pack like some kind of automotive X-ray. And let's not forget the looming threat of AI-designed muscle cars, trained on decades of conflicting data. The first AI-generated performance vehicle might resemble a ChatGPT fever dream. All aggressive angles and no soul, like a teenager's gaming PC turned into a car. The real tragedy? These future abominations won't even have the excuse of poor manufacturing or cost cutting. They'll be ugly by deliberate, data-driven choice. Focus groups will insist they want bold designs, engineers will prioritize aerodynamics over aesthetics, and marketing teams will greenlight whatever gets clicks, regardless of how it looks in real life. The muscle cars of tomorrow might be faster, smarter, and greener than ever. But unless someone saves us from ourselves, they're also going to be eye-wateringly hideous. The golden age of muscle car design isn't coming back. It's evolving into something stranger, sillier, and at times downright stupid. Buckle up, because the ride into the future is going to be one hell of an eyesore.